Good job.
Thank you, everybody, for coming in. I know a lot of people are on spring break. And for those of you who are here, thank you for coming, whether you're in person or in the Zoom room, as we like to call it. Wow, we spent a lot of time since our last meeting refining this scenario and laying out the various pieces that would be our recommendation. They'll become our recommendations for the county commissioners. And when I look at these, I ask myself, are we being bold enough? Are we being bold enough yet? We've spent several months working on what will be our recommendations and in the grand scheme of things, the months that we've spent working on this will hopefully have a positive impact over the next 8 years or the 7 years. 2030 is a critical goal on the climate side. And hopefully we'll be able to reach the 80% reduction in emissions by 2050 that the county commissioners have set out and we've agreed to. So we've learned so much over the last few months. It's crazy. I think about how much I know now compared to when we started this meeting in September. All about the house size and location and transportation and housing and so many different factors. And so tonight, as we dive into the scenario and go through it, most of it line by line, we're really going to be able to look at the big levers and how they're going to impact quality of life and our economy and how we want to improve our environment. So I think we should, because we have a smaller group, I think Miles will probably reiterate this. We're not going to make any final decisions tonight. We'll make provisional decisions, and then we'll have to revisit some things or them, I guess, in early April. But we are down to our last 3 meetings, including tonight, unless we decide to have another meeting. And then, of course, hopefully there's going to be some. Not hopefully, I know there will be some outreach meetings that will be held for the community so that they can hear what we've come up with over these many months. So I think Michael, he's online because he's on spring break. And yes. Michael, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Nope, I think that all sounds good.
Great. So Miles.
All right, let's take it away. So looking at the agenda and the purpose of the meeting tonight, Mona has outlined it perfectly. What we want to do is really use tonight to dig in and honor the request of this group to go through line by line. Again, not making provisional decisions, but also identifying where there are areas of any strenuous objection on one end of the spectrum, and on the other side of it, where's there some strong consensus. So to that end, we heard a lot at our last meeting about this tiering system. And so what we're going to do when we start to go line by line is we're going to skip the first 2 floor area ratio and square footage and dive right into the tiering system and look at how it relates to some of the things where there is strong consensus on the performance standards, the development standards, and hopefully begin to unpack any areas where maybe members of the committee feel like we just can't live with this, and where are there areas that this is solid, let's move on so we can make some of those provisional decisions that when we have a larger group we can start to confirm them. So that's how we're going to roll through it tonight. And we did make some structural changes to the scenario that we've all seen that is in the packet based on your feedback to incorporate the tiering system. So we want to get straight to it tonight. But as Mona said, including tonight, we've got 3 meetings left. We added the option, as you'll see here on the screen, for a 4th if we need it. It's one of the intervening Wednesdays on April 19th. So we're not going to make a decision on that. We ask if you could hold it on your calendars at the end of the next meeting. Let's see how far we can get. And if we feel like we need it, we have it as an option and we can move forward from there. So looking at our draft scenario, what we heard from you all last time was there was some really strong themes coming out of that meeting. I mean, almost to a person, we heard more focus on housing solutions was a priority. And looking at that tiered system, as I said, that's where we're going to start tonight and see how that fits in. As part of that, we also heard refinements to GMQS and TDRs, and the special review was a big topic of discussion. So we've applied that to the scenario you're gonna see tonight as well. Concerns regarding subdivision, so we've made some modifications to the scenario to address that. And then continuing to be bold, but having a focus on the specificity of some of the recommendations in this scenario, rather than granularity that gets too down into the weeds that can go back to our conversation about what policy level recommendations should this group be coming up with that are going to be most impactful, and then the administrative implementation of those, as we heard from County Manager Peacock, will really be done as a separate phase. Welcome, and we do have public seating in the back, and we'll have public comment at the end. Thanks for being here. Do you want to introduce yourself to the group?
I'm Jim Light, here to be quiet as a church mouse.
There'll be a time at the end for public comment, so thanks for being here. And again, the line by line review of this scenario, we want to make sure that we looked at all the component parts last time, that this time we really take the time to dig in. And again, look at where may be some strenuous objection, where they're strong, and the areas in between. Hopefully we can have some good discussion on tonight. So that's what we heard, how they're applied, including a new section in this scenario on housing policies, application of the tiered system, refined FAR, the floor area ratio sliding scale with a house size cap integrated. Those are the first two lines in the table we'll look at tonight. We're going to skip over those and go straight into the tiered system and then circle back up to the top. You're going to see a revision to QS and TDRs and special review actually taking square footage out of GMQS and using GMQS as a tool to manage subdivision and growth, removing and mitigating exemptions for square footage, overlay for landing TDRs and STRs and special events. So that goes back to what's left in overlay to do and using it to really manage the uses that we focus on rather than the square footage. So this graphic is one that really helped us all kind of stack the pieces and describe it. And so you have this in your packet. You're going to see it actually on page 2. And at the end, there is on the last page, there's the tiering system. So you can kind of toggle back and forth. But this one, basically the scenario that we have before us tonight has that floor area ratio applied to the entire county to reduce gross square footage. It also has a maximum house size cap, as the scenario did at our last meeting of 9,300. What was added is more of a range to address the comments from this group. Is maybe a hard and fast number is a little too granular, and we need to be focusing on range. So both options are in this scenario. GMQS, the change there was that square footage was removed from GMQS to simplify it and return the system to its original intent of pacing the growth of subdivision. And so a new thing, taking square footage out of GMQS, is a square footage quota system where all exempt square footage would continue to function like it did in GMQS with an exemption at 5750. But the UGB basement exemption is either removed or reduced for this group to discuss. All new development and redevelopment over 5750 would then be subject to an annual square footage allotment, which is what happens today. And competition and scoring would be replaced with special review and special review criteria to directly address the impacts that we've discussed as a group. You'll see in the scenario, but also waiting in line then for a quota allocation. And the TDR system remains as a tool to add square footage above 5750, and the value of the TDR would be reduced to 1,000 square feet, as it was in the scenario reviewed at our last meeting. Sending sites for the TDRs would remain largely as they are today to preserve rural character. The landing sites would be determined by the overlay zones that you see in the scenario, and they would all require special review. And then the tiering system comes in. So these are the elements that kind of sit above it. The tiering system then establishes a strong baseline of new performance and development standards, requirements that get more stringent as house size increases, and smaller homes would be incentivized via streamlined review with tiered requirements as impacts increase. So on the next slide, what you're going to see is what's on the last page of your packet. And so this just breaks down the tiering system a little bit more. And the tiering system, as I said, strong baseline of performance and development standards, it's more stringent, it's outside some increases. Smaller homes incentivized, larger homes are subject to a more stringent review and tiered mitigation and impact fees. Tiering is based on square footage percentage and the total disturbance of parcel and net parcel size concept. So the tiering structure under 3250 would be a tier 1 that must meet all of these new code standards for an accelerated review. Tier 2, 3250 to 5750 is mitigating additional on-site impacts and respecting site constraints with more review criteria, requirements, and review criteria and requirements because of constraints, and then more review because of building complexity. So then when you get above the 5750, tier 3 has impacts beyond the property that must be directly extinguished or mitigated. So that's what you'll see in this scenario, subject to the most review criteria at tier 3 with special review, TDRs, a quota system, mitigation fees, and limited uses in the overlay area. So that's a very, very high level simplification of the 18 or so pages that follow. So this group also asks for some examples. And so we found that the real world examples make it very easy to understand. So example in the UGB, if you had 11 acres in that overlay, that's zone E. The existing square footage was 0 if it's not been developed. And 95% of the parcel would be below 30% scope. Under the draft scenario, the FAR would permit that size parcel in the UGB 10,400 with a cap of 9,300. That would then require anything above 750 to be offset with TDR. So you need 3 TDRs, and the remaining 550 square feet would still be part of the square footage allotment. So require special review and weighting. And the rural example here, again, undeveloped parcel, 21 acres located in the rural valley overlay zone C that you see in the scenario. Undeveloped, 85% of that parcel is below the 30% scope. So that would give you an FAR max of 11,900 square feet with the cap of 9,300 square feet. You get that exempt 5750, 1 TDR, and then the remaining 2,550 square feet would go into the square footage quota system, that new SFQS, which is the bifurcation of the GMQS to take square footage out of it. So those 2 examples we thought were helpful, and we can refer back to them as we go through. There's also a redevelopment example that if you had 8 acres located in the UGB with an existing structure that was 8,200 square feet, 77% of that parcel is below 30% scope. Under the FAR, you would get 9,100 square feet. That's below your cap, so FAR rules, and the additional 900 square feet to build beyond max would require a TDR or going into the square footage quotas. So Cindy and Kara, you all are much more fluent in this than I did. What did I miss?
AICD and planning.
I'm getting there.
Hey, Miles, just a quick question for clarification on the rural example that you just showed, that would be trumped by the caucus?
Yeah, so the example is still showing it in a caucus that does not have,
Restriction.
right, so if it was in a caucus that had a restriction, it would be trumped.
Yeah, and so whatever is lower would be the one that trumps. Yeah, 10 years.
So the SFQS is a new level, a new something, whatever. But it seems in all 3 examples, it just seems, why are we complicating things by adding that when the cap is 93 or whatever that number is going to be?
And that's, I think, what we want to discuss tonight when we get into it. Yeah, that's the discussion.
And yeah, and what I would kind of plant that seed, and Cindy can jump in here, is right now there is square footage competition, right? As Cliff has talked about in growth management, right? Within the growth management system, you still have to compete for any additional square footage above 5750. What essentially is being proposed here is, as Mel said, we're bifurcating it out of competition, but there still is the allotment. So it's not It's not necessarily a new or something, we don't really know what to call it, but it's trying to pull the competition element out and just say, there's an allotment. If you meet the special review, you go and you sit in line, you don't have to go through competition and scoring or anything like
What is the reason that allotment? Why not just do away with it? Why have the allotment?
It's the only way to get the square footage.
that. So the pace it,
Yeah, but we're changing the rules here.
But the thing is, if you keep the 5750 as the standard exemption, then you have to figure out how you get above that with your, either you buy TDR or you get an allotment through the growth management system. And the whole concept is growth management. So how are you managing that growth in the form of square footage in this case? So managing that growth, pacing, you heard a lot about here, really goes back to how that square footage is allocated. So if you're not getting it through a TDR, if you're not getting everything you could through a TDR, then how else do we pace it to achieve the goals that we've been hearing? So, I mean, it's a good question.
Well,
You have
but
multiple systems.
The allotment for the pacing could be up to 9,300, boom, that's it. Why allow something additional if we're trying to downsize?
They're not allowing it.
We're not, it's not saying, like, those houses
But
could have gone in, like, one of them.
there's one 10,400 going from.
But it's capped at 93.
But it's capped at 93. The
But
orange,
it's saying you must still be part of the SFQS allotment, so
because there was.
that looks like you're allowing above 9,300 by 20.
So that gives you.
No, it gets you to 93. That's your pathway to 93.
Okay.
So now, there.
That's an equation down that up to 5750. 5750 plus 3,000 plus 550 is what gets you to your total number. And Cindy, is it worth mentioning, is there a TDR limitation on, like, you can only get so many? Have you mentioned that by, was that said?
Yeah, but maybe it's worth emphasizing that within the different overlay zones, different numbers of TDRs are allowed. Using that principle of, as you get further out, the character that we've been talking about is less square footage as you get further out. So you're allowed to apply for and land more TDRs closer in. And as you get further out, you're allowed less TDRs to be landed on your property. So the examples used here are that E, which is the urban growth boundary overlay, that would be, if you remember the map, E you could go up to 3 TDRs. Whereas if you're out in C, which is that hinterland that is beyond the pavement, you know, where the road turns start,
it's
beyond.
not before the pavement, just to clarify.
And those
Yeah,
Those
so,
TDR allocations are part of the overlay that is on page 14 in your
okay,
packet.
so that you only are allowed to land 1 TDR. So, there you go.
So in this example, the urban growth boundary, if you wanted to build 8750 and land the 2 TRs back at 550, you have to go through, you just buy the TDRs and spend for a permit.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. It's a,
So you can still buy your way in up to whatever, you know, the number of TDRs based on how close you are.
up to your sliding scale, and you can get there. You just either have to get there through buying a TDR or going through the review process, which is no longer a competition, but it's it's basically setting new standards and are meeting those standards.
And I think just one piece that as we were going through it, trying to, you know, understand what we've heard from all of you is there's 2 pieces in this, you know, why are we still adding complexity? Is what we've heard from all of you is 2 components. One is there is still value in the TDR system because of what it does to preserve the rural lands. For that, we have to create a market to land the TDRs, right, or else you can't send them. So we had to find a way of that still had a market for landing TDRs, but also pacing development, and also if you didn't want a TDR, you still could get up to the square footage, you're just pacing it in a different way. So I think just understanding those two competing interests, right, that we heard our values all of you is what you're seeing up here right now.
Other,
So we just eliminate the creative bonus concept of, scoring. Yeah, scoring, yeah, the creative bonus where you can come in and say, well, I'm gonna donate this to the fire department, this to the school board and so on. That's kind of a pay to play thing, my smart chatter.
It's in
Yeah, mitigation fund is absolutely in there. It is.
So, does that have anything to do with how you achieve the cap? Or is it a performance standard, or is it just a community benefit? In other words,
My recommendation was every time a TDR was purchased, there would be a mitigation fund assessment associated with it.
this has nothing to do with TDRs, this is just somebody writing a check to fund a community need. So it's kind of
Through GMQS.
QS, so is it a performance standard, or is it something that someone can still do? Again, it's incredible now. Yeah.
So we can write it, so the way it's proposed right now, that concept is still within competition for subdivision, right, and development. So that is still part of competition for subdivision. What we heard from all of you is for square footage, we want to know what's being landed and take the subjectivity out of it. And so there's no longer a pay for this community benefit or not. We've set up in the scenario before you is your development standards and your performance standards and the special review are what is setting up the values that you all want to see of how square footage is landed in the county.
And I think it'll all become much clearer as we kind of walk through line by line, see how all these pieces fit together and then how they interrelate. So Cliff.
So scoring, as you know, is a pet peeve of mine, yes. So if you're gonna do away with scoring, how do you judge all the applications that come for an allotment?
standards. Standards. We're saying what we want, it's not going as far as I want to did, but we're saying what we want, and we're telling you how you can get there. But if you can't meet those community values that we're saying you gotta meet, then sorry, you can't have that square footage.
And Cliff, I think to answer your question is the third bullet here on the square foot quota system. Competition and scoring is replaced with special review. And then you're required to wait in line.
The many special review, I think your answer, but that was a pretty broad term, and I get what standards you're talking about, energy, affordable housing, or what are the, are there specifics to these?
We're gonna talk about it.
I didn't want to base you have.
Yeah,
it's a
Sorry.
long packet.
it's long.
It's a big packet, and there's a lot of concepts, so let's see if we can.
And we're gonna be going through it line by line to really acknowledge the request.
But if I could just say, but
Yeah.
the intent tonight is to grasp the concept of what's happening here and if that's acceptable or not to the group, but not to actually cook the soup. So I don't think we'll come up with every little standard. That has to take lots of work with, after this group is done.
But you're right, the standard will be a combination. The standards will be a combination of performance standards, which are relating to energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and development standards that are coming directly from the development standards section of the land use code.
Okay, what I'm trying to understand is, are you gonna replace, are you gonna have this measurement, standards? And then are we scoring that at PNC?
It's like you get through the threshold, you've met the standards.
So
then
the
you're
thing in terms of thresholds.
And you're at the DNB and you have your number, and your number is called up, you can go build your square footage.
Right.
But Cliff, you'll still be reviewing growth management for some new subdivisions, but not for square footage additions.
Only new subdivision, what about building a brand new house? That's not a new subdivision.
If you're under 5750, you already got a lot somewhere, you don't need a subdivision.
True, but then do I still come to GMQS to get an allotment?
Not if you're under 5750,
Well, what if I want to build bigger than 5750?
you go through
Then I have
the.
the standards process.
Right.
Then you got the square footage chance that we're talking about.
Okay,
Right.
all right, well, let's not fall for getting rid of scoring altogether, so.
And that's where you have the special review that you'll see in the scenario.
No, I understand the difference. I'm
Okay,
good with that.
okay. Perfect.
And I would disturb the suit.
Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, thanks. Mona. So, at the direction of the co-chairs, staff has been asked to take the outcomes table that you saw in the packet and begin to start applying some scoring to it. Some of the scoring is quantifiable based on measurable things like greenhouse gas emissions. Others are more subjective. At the direction of the co-chairs, we started to do this scoring, but I should also say they haven't seen it yet. So this is the first time they're seeing it as well. But one of the things we did as a group is just come up with a consistent methodology for scoring and what the actual definitions are. So if something's in red, it moves us backwards. Our goal is at this phase, nothing in the scenario is red and moving us backwards. There are some utilities. And then there are various degrees of progress. So if you see something with one fact, it's something that is making progress in the right direction, doesn't necessarily get us to our stated goals from the Board of County Commissioners or really reflect our values truly. You see two checks, it gets us there, achieves our goals. Something that surpasses it would be 3, and we were trying to be pretty tough graders, not giving out a lot of ECAs on this one. And so, it's again, the first preliminary scoring for you all to discuss, but as we walk through line by line, we're gonna kind of summarize for the floor area ratio, for example, how did it score? What are some of the differentiators in terms of pros and cons? As I said, we're gonna circle back to FAR and the square footage cap because there was so much energy on the tiering system at our last discussion. We really wanted to focus in on how that works. So what you see here in the summary, and I'm gonna let Kara and Cindy fill in anything I missed, is the tiering system really is an effective tool for making progress towards every single goal that we have. And what you saw with the different structures, it allows us to really incentivize simplicity and really understand that in a lot of these situations, time can be more valuable than money. It's also a progressively more complex process as the house size and the related impact that goes back to our list of what we want to see more and less of begin to increase. The cons, that's pretty well to discuss if there are any. So in terms of the tiering system, Cindy and Kara, what did I miss at the high level summary?
The only thing that I would add on the real high level summary is that when we're scoring all these different factors of climate, balance, economy, and community character, these tools are so interrelated that it's not just a silver bullet in one category. So you get the tool working for you in one category, it might help you in another category. And so we tried to reflect that by the number of checks. And then we'll discuss how they all intertwined together, because some people may say, okay, well, the tiered system that gets, that you have to work harder to get the larger home, that may also check your box in community character. You know, that because you're out in the middle of nowhere and you want a smaller home from a visual perspective. Or it may check your box because a smaller home theoretically is gonna have less traffic, that kind of thing. So you have to think about them all interrelated. That's all I would say.
Yeah, I think for now, this is the beginning of the line by line review. And so tiering system is almost more of a launching pad because it launches us right into performance and development standards and some of the things that actually are tiered, but we wanted to pause. It actually starts on page 5 of your packet is the first part of the tiering system, the recommendation, the rationale, the scoring you see behind you, and then also a description of what the different tiers are that are consistent with the graphic we went through. But the tiering system took staff some time to figure out how do we design an architecture for this tiering system that could be implemented by staff and would not be cumbersome. And so as you see here, what it does is really sets the new code that has a strong baseline of performance and development standards that get progressively more complex as house size and impacts increase. Essentially, that's its point.
So can we comment or is this?
Yes, no, this is, I'm done talking. This is your turn.
So I have two issues with tiering. Number one, that there would be more tiers above 5750. Which, the 9,300, by the way, is a weird number when you're starting at 5750. And I think that there shouldn't, if you have if you are going to do 1,000 square foot TDRs, 3 of them, the max that you're allowing in any place, which would be UGB, adding that to 5750, that should be where house cap is. That's, I mean, it's a little unrelated to tiering. The other thing is, it's only about house size tiering. It's not about where we're allowing places to be built, what zones is inappropriate. I like Randy and thank you. I like the idea that they have a zoning approach to house cap. And because to me, there are some places rural and remote that leaving that out and just looking at rural areas, it should be way tougher. Because UGB really want TDR, the land would want development to be.
So I think, Cliff, one of the pieces you're bringing up is the FAR, which we're not diving into, but that relates to this tiering system as well. And so if you've got your FAR and you're in a rural and remote area, the tiering system would not necessarily, the FAR.
That's almost 1,000 square feet.
That example, but if you look at another location, then the FAR may dictate which tier you fall into. And so that would have some implications there.
Oh, that goes to what I said. There's only one thing above 5750. You know, there are plenty of houses there now that are 6, 8. You know, and I wonder about should it get really tough once you're over 5750, and then let's say you're at 6,500 or 7,000, and they still want to add more to that. And if you're going to have 1,000 square foot TDR, it's easy for them to start creeping closer. There are, in my opinion, a number of zones that I think are inappropriate coming down out of Independence Pass, for instance. The houses there are huge. And something that bothers me. They're across from North Star. What the heck do we need 15,000 square foot houses, 10,000 square foot houses across the street from North Star? Not appropriate to me. So that's why I at least bring it up to you all to hear that I'm not against tiering. I just wonder about again the zoning and how does it apply to their places, I'm sure, in DeSault and elsewhere in the county that we feel is or should feel that it's inappropriate.
So Cliff, just as at the stage of where we are today, outside of the UGB, except for a couple of little exceptions, there's no FAR cap. So
Well, let's not 50,000.
the 15,000, thank you. There's no sliding scale. So everything's the same, outside. So what Randy and Glenn's concept is not about the zone districts. It's about the size of your parcel. So the size of the house increases with the size of the parcel. It doesn't have anything to do with your coming down in this pass or the way out in, you know, Old Snowmouse or whatever. You've got the same sliding scale across the board, which is what we're looking at right here.
But Cindy, so many zones are parcel size that they're like R10, you know?
But so
That's a
many,
10-acre site, you know, R20, 20-acre site.
right.
So it's kind of inextricably tied together. East of Aspen, what is that? It's a,
10,
the zone that is. But I mean, you have to think of an example up there, 8 acres, and they could have it about 9,000 square foot house. That to me, that's not right.
Well, and that was the redevelopment example as well. I think that we were looking at there, but for the tiering system, I think it's important to note that the only square footage relationship that tiering has is just to set the tiers, and then it's progressive development and performance standards, and they overlay the FAR, the house side, that's where the square footage is managed. Really, the tiering system is how the really review process and performance and development standards are managed. And that the only relationship it has to square footage is that square footage is what defines the tiers, and then square footage is out. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I would just say, you know, if you all want to be started, we put it at the starting place of 3 tiers. The lowest tier is your average house size right now. If you all want more tiers, plus tiers, this is the starting place for you all to discuss.
Yeah.
Could you clarify for me, so if you're in the FAR ratio and you're in, depending on your acreage, so even if you're in a rural area, you're permitted, you own 200 acres, and you're in a rural area, then you're permitted at 15,000 square foot.
not in this scenario caps everything at 9,300.
Oh, I mean, 90. So even if you're in a rural area, you able to go to 9,200 square foot.
Yeah, it's just that you have to get there, you can only use one TDR to get there, and you have to go through the special review standards to achieve it.
Well, I don't really have to do that in the whole concept of overlaying on rural areas. It's kind of personal, so I don't know how many people own an acreage, but when you own it, we've owned it for years. You know, having someone come in and say, I'm sorry, you were charged for this piece of land, but you're gonna have to go through all these steps if you want to build a home over 9,300 square feet, when you couldn't.
You can't
You
build.
can't build it in that.
Right, but I mean, right, no, I get the 93, sorry about that. So will all the caucuses go back to the 9,300? I mean, it could go over the valley, it's 50,000 feet.
Whatever is most restrictive,
Excuse me?
it's whatever is most restrictive.
Okay.
Right, so Emma is 8250, so let's say you get land on 200, Emma's 8250. 8250 out of supersede, right?
Well, sitting on the Chris Order caucus for as long as I did, and going to multiple meetings and sending surveys throughout, you know, the Crystal River Valley, and people coming up with what they thought was good answers to the questions that were given them. I find it hard to go back and say, well, I'm sorry, we're doing this over. Your home site can only be 92 square feet. That's just my opinion.
Thanks, Lee. And I'm hearing a lot of energy on the square footage side of it, for the tiering side of it.
Oh, sorry.
Where, because we do want to go line by line, and there was so much energy around the tiering system from you all last time. We want to make sure that we honor it, and that we discuss the tiering system. So, Chris and then Rick.
Energy was a good.
Yeah, thanks. So having missed last meeting and then seeing the scenario, I really like the tiering system. I think it's well designed. I think, you know, Carrie, your point, where you put the criteria, the average, and then going above make a lot of sense. And I do think some of the goals identified, I think you guys got those right. Particularly kind of like the workforce and housing imbalance. I mean, I just, I'm not a market expert or in the biz, but to me, it, naturally seems like a real incentive to go faster under 30, whatever, would help make that average and below more appealing. And that the complexity, like the added complexity and cost, that would come with more intensive requirements, standards on top of that, would be less likely, to impact that kind of buyer in that range than like requiring everything to have, like that absolutely nice. So I like it, 'cause I think it like balances all the things nicely.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it is an objective.
Could we,
Oh,
I said, Chris,
yeah. I think it's objective enough so that you're sending a clear message to whoever might.
Sorry, can we just all speak up? There's a lot of people virtually.
Um, I think it's objective, and I think it gives good, clear direction to elected officials to, when they're reviewing these processes, they have a staff, if they come on board. It's cleaned up a lot of stuff, it makes sense from a land use point of view. The question I have is, what about agricultural buildings, equestrian facilities, and all that stuff that gets piled on? Are we just talking about a house at 9,300 square feet, or are we talking about total square footage development of 9,300 square feet? Because that's where we get these other pathways to an ADU and a caretaker unit in a barn, or an equestrian facility that's 8,000 square feet, or a loping shed, or whatever the heck else they have attached to it. 200.
Is there a quick answer to that? I feel like I'll pass lead back to the square footage conversation. So I'm gonna keep steering us on the tiers a little bit, just to make sure that there's nothing in here that nobody can live with.
I don't remember which one, so that what is embedded in this recommendation is that basement square footage comes in as all in one within the building footprint as far as what will be built. So that's one, and then the other, and this was working with staff, the other recommendation is that you all recommend a review of the agricultural policies as it mirrors some of this, so not bringing it all in. I think there's obviously a value with a lot of the agricultural, but that would need to be evaluated in implementation on any of this stuff. And I don't remember which road that is in there.
Just to follow up on that preservation of the agricultural character of the valley leads us into this discussion about, well, this guy's gonna put 20 cows on his property. Therefore, he's maintaining this character of rural nature with pastoral views from the highway and things like that, but it generates that much more demand from the community for services and infrastructure and your whole 9 yards. So I think it's something that, if you're truly engaged in it, like some people are, that's one thing. If it's a hobby ranch, it's kind of a different story.
Just one minor, but and maybe not an issue, but I think like what we hear a lot is people are building the max square footage because they're worried they're not gonna be able to build it anymore. And so I think if people were to build below the, 5750, I think they should preserve their right to build at least at 5750 in the future. So you don't have the fear that rules may change. It gives them kind of, a safety, feeling of safety if they sacrifice square footage. Yeah, and on the square footage point too, I know 9,300 is an easy number. We also, at the feedback this year, put the range in from 8 to 10, to provide a little more flexibility there. And then, Mona, where do you want to go next? We'll get up.
I think Joe had his.
Well,
Oh, Doug actually.
mine is really quick, and it is tiers.
Thanks, Doug.
I think that we should also have lower fees for the tier one, not just accelerated review. Decrease the fees, more carrots. Let's do it. As we get higher, the cost gets so incredibly expensive. And the fees are, everybody always complains, but if we're really incentivizing let's make it cheaper, charge the cost to the upper tiers. And I think that maybe we do need a fourth tier, you know, you figure you land 2 TVRs, that gets you 7750, so over 7750 is tier 4. And then it gets, you know, we're talking about the mitigation expenses and all these kind of things. You know, we're trying to pay for things.
I just want to say,
Thank you, Doug. So, John, you read.
I just would second that. I think that there's sort of an easy progression in the sizes of the way you created these tiers, but the way it's set up right now, I don't know why anybody would build a 6,500 square foot home if they wanted to build 93. So I think putting in an additional tier, I know that we're trying to simplify, but we are trying to convince people to build smaller and be more efficient. We're trying to get to that. And so I don't know what the end number is going to end up being, but I think that's a big jump. That last one.
Yeah, so kind of in between, going between is what you're suggesting.
Whatever the cap should be, whatever the cap ends up being, it should be halfway between that. That would be my recommendation.
And that was my comment as well, the need to add another tier.
Great, can we hear from Christie?
Just real quickly, I really agree with Cliff's comment, I know it's about square footage, but the 9,300 is a silly number. Why is it just not 9,750? So it's an equal number here. But getting to my relevant question, we agreed, I think, a couple of weeks ago that the energy code standards would be the same for any size house,
Right.
correct? And so it seems like the big difference in the development standards. And could you just give me an example of a more reviewed criteria for development standards? Like what could a smaller house get away with for development standards that a larger house couldn't, or is that what it means? It says more review requirements.
Right, well, I think
Do you want me to try and then let the experts go?
you go.
Yeah. So I the past 2 weeks, Christie. So, and there's a lot of people in here that will correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand, as we talk about it is, it's kind of like what's a black and white, right? So if you've got a development standard and you're not building in a wetland zone, or you're not disturbing that area, or you're not in wildlife, like you need to mitigate something here for over here, you're just, here's my parcel, I'm meeting all the codes, I'm doing it just like it says, it's just a checkbox. So I'm kind of the accelerate, that's the idea of, this is the review, I've done it all, it's great. But then I understand this when you talk about development standards, if you've got to mitigate for something on site, you're in a wildlife range, you're in a wetlands, there's something that you've got to change for whatever reason, that just starts to be more review time from staff, it takes more planner time, and so that was kind of my understanding of that difference of the review in the development standards.
But what if a little house is right in the center of an elk migration corridor, is it gonna take it? Be concerned, I just.
It still has to address the constraint, which is the elk.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still has to address that. I think that there are different, it's kind of a mixed bag, because in some cases, there's more restriction proportionately to the home, like the disturbance area, that kind of thing. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's more of a process than it is to a certain degree what the standard is.
Yeah, and I know you guys are in charge of the detail of this, the recommendations,
But
a little more clarity on what more review requirements means, but later. Anyway.
That's great, Christie, because now you're transitioning us into the development standards. Let's, Christie, have a comment or question?
Yeah, just a quick one. I thought Blake's idea was really good. Is, responsive to incentives and behaviors, and that's really important for us to keep in mind. My one addition was gonna be, if we consider adding that, we should also think about, how not to make it a loophole and kind of like give away a lower standard of 30, whatever it is. Maybe there's like just some kind of contingency if you decide to add, you have to like bring the rest of your square footage up to whatever the tier is or something.
You'd have
Just
to
like, Yeah, just so like, you know, people are working in good faith and not kind of using it to like game what they're required to do.
Does that meet with the intent of what you were suggesting as well, like?
Yeah, I think so. I think it, you know, people look at add on and they're not gonna just lose that one day.
They would have to go into that next year.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really.
Great, right. Everybody else, so.
Yeah, two things, and I apologize if it's not related right to the tier system, but first is, I'd really like us to have a vote on what that 9,300 number is, okay? And the second thing is, I see a lot of value in subgrade space. It removes the volume, the exterior volume of house sites. So I am in favor of getting rid of the exemption, but I'd like to incentivize. How do we incentivize subgrade?
Yeah, thank you, and that's precisely why we added the 8,000 to 10,000 range that we put in the scenario too, is to try to take some of the pressure off 93, which we hear you, it's a weird number, it was kind of the median number from the discussions that we did, but it's the range that we put into, so we're gonna get the square footage, the tiering system, I think we've heard some really good feedback on it, adding another level, lower.
Sorry, I just want to follow up, because I think you said it a couple times, so just so everyone knows, there will be a vote on square footage, but not tonight, obviously, we want more people around the table, it will have to happen before this moves forward. So I wanted to be honest about it.
Why not the struggle?
We have like on the basement.
You're going to get dots.
You're gonna get dots,
Oh, the dots on the chart.
Let's clarify the upgrade conversation, because it feels like there's a little bit of energy around that, and I think, I'm gonna take a stab at this, because I've been in some of the meetings, but I think the idea is to eliminate the opportunity to build a 9,300 square foot home, and then add another, whatever, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000 square feet subgrade and not get it.
Oh, yeah, I think we all need to have those stats we can vote on. Yeah. I mean, I just wonder, okay, I look forward, but then I'm sure we'll do.
And
Anyway.
So,
And there's, wait, let me, there's been a lot of conversation, is 200 or is there a mechanical room allowance for that kind of, you know, in the subgrade space? So I don't think we've settled on that.
Well, we have already in the code some exemption. If it's under 5.6, if it's under 5.6, you know, you can use that as a mechanical space without the need of an exemption. It's up to a certain balance, which is pretty big.
we find it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so go on, can we move on and or do you want to say something really?
Only the explanation, what you described wasn't exactly right.
Okay,
So there's square footage, right? There's floor area. And then there's this exempt basement that you're talking about. But the exempt basement plus the above grade space goes to gross floor area, the sum of which can't exceed 9,300 feet or whatever our number is, or 15,000 square feet now. So the way you described it was that it was an addition, but it's not really an addition.
okay,
It's an addition above your floor area. So like on Red Mountain, for example, there's a 0.13 floor area ratio. So if your lot, multiply your lot size times 0.13, and let's say just for argument's sake, that it comes out that you could build a 4,000 square foot house by floor area ratio. Then, because it's in the UGB, you can also build another 4,000 square feet of basement and 750 square feet of garage, or 4,750. So that takes your gross floor area to 8,750. It's still below, it would still cap at whatever we decide the cap is going to be. Right?
That
So
makes
it's not really in addition to the cap.
right,
It does get counted. Then you have to pay TDR by TDR for that space, the way it sits now.
yeah, okay, thank you.
But if we do away with the exemption, then we're substituting subgrade space, or they're gonna add it to the above grade space. They're gonna try to capture that somewhere.
Because it's FAR. We can only develop because the site constraints are where we like be or the farmland. We can only build that much above grade. And convert your underground square footage to a surface.
Or you'd be limited by whatever the, restrictions are on the lot size, et cetera.
And the square footage is square footage, and then there's gonna be a deep discussion on square footage. Get there. What I hope, what I was
not gonna be a deep discussion on the tiers.
But if I could get some feedback on the tiers and to Steve's point, how the tiers come to life as in development of performance standards, and hopefully we've talked about these a lot, and hopefully we can move them pretty quickly through the process and we can get to the fun stuff and then have the square footage conversations. One of the, do you want to check in with your fellow co-chair and anybody virtually before we move on to development
Yes, I'm not
standards?
seeing any hands up. Is there anybody that wants to chime in on what's online?
About tiers.
About, yes, thank you, about tiers. No? All right. Like that, nobody does.
And Michael, can I check in? How's the audio? Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, it's quite good. Yeah, it's just when everybody gets going at once, it gets hard, but that hasn't happened too much, so it's been good.
Perfect. We'll be better about one speaker at a time, and it's, when we get the square footage, I can't possibly. So for development standards, we can pull back the curtain. This is one too. We spent a lot of time talking about development standards, but you'll see in your packet, really the tiering system establishes that full baseline of development standards that does all the things we talked about in the last meeting. So I'm not going to read through it, but along with performance standards and direction, development will speak. Development standards, it's a critical tool for advancing our climate goals, helps to address impacts beyond square footage. It still doesn't get us to those 3 checks in greenhouse gases or climate, as we talked about with the group, unless there's a recommendation from this committee, to look at the transportation sector. We're probably never going to get to that very ambitious 90% GHG reduction. But in the land use realm, development standards are a hugely powerful tool, and you can see on page 8, kind of how the tiering system would then be integrated into the development standard. With tier 1, meeting these baseline standards, the updated code, no request for exterior amenities, pools, ponds, those types of things. Tier 2, you meet the standards of the code, again, that's the baseline, but it requires some of the on-site mitigation, whether it's water quality, energy offsets, to mitigate some of those impacts. Exterior amenities or material waste are minimal and can be mitigated on site. And then we get up into tier 3 and potentially into tier 4, as we heard from all of you, we should be looking at that. Meeting the standard of the code, again, is the baseline, but requires significant mitigation and staff review, a limit of the exterior amenities, water and waste production, and then mitigation of on-site constraints is significant. So Karen, Cindy, did I miss anything there in the intent? And yeah, but
When you run development, you know, on performance, where you.
we were on development.
Hey,
Okay. And again, this was one we talked about a lot. I'm hoping we can, that's why we started here, so we can move through tiers and then some of the other things and then get to good stuff. So, any comments on development standards, or do we roll the next into performance standards since they're so closely related?
I just have a quick question. Aren't some of these already in the code? I mean, like activity envelopes, as far as maximum area disturbance and, the constraint of the ecological bias or watershed, wildlife habitat, isn't that already?
They are, but what we heard from this group is let's amend those and make those even more rigorous in certain areas, like, I don't know, rigorous is the word, but right now we use, say, for wildlife standards, very specific standards that are, big game kind of standards, not a total ecosystem watershed kind of approach. Sierra talked about that. Tom Cardamon's overlays that he's been working on as far as like how animals need certain zones of migration and that sort of thing would be a much more involved look at the ecosystem and would apply that kind of thing. So upgrade those kinds of things in the code, upgrade the percentage of disturbed areas, say around a home, so that you're not landscaping your, 50-acre parcel, that kind of thing.
What does it, as the second bill, establish maximum area of disturbance as percent of net coastal site? I think that's what you're just describing. But is that saying you're reducing the size of the building envelope, or, I mean?
And how much you tear up,
Yeah.
how much you tear up, the ground around.
Got it, okay, I got it. As do landscaping, so, okay, thanks, sir.
I would say when we're talking about being bold, establish water restriction goals. Also with city requirements. Clearly, water reduction, they have to be requirements, not a goal. The goal is to have not 40 acres or whatever it is. You gotta have a requirement, you can't just all people go around the goal.
I think that's a great point.
And to maximize passive solar gain, I think that we need to say that differently, because the houses now that they're in this big wall of glass, solar gain is the problem in that air conditioning.
Yeah, good call.
So I think that's needs to be.
Yeah, there's constantly like the passive house standards that account for both. Class good words. I just want to say, I really like the development standard that they're generally on track. Cindy, I appreciate what you were saying about like wildlife biodiversity, additional granularity. And that's you that word. But that's just really capturing the intent, right? Just kind of large species, and I think probably with the right underlying frameworks, it doesn't necessarily have to be like more onerous to do. It's probably just like a foundational tool or data set that needs to be developed that brings in all the biodiversity types. And the kind of C&D thresholds. Important on the GHG side. And I think touch a little bit on ERT, a little bit, but yeah, because a lot of our like 80% of our waste goes to landfill is C&D. That's from the city. But so yeah, sorry. So yeah, there's just fewer truckloads, a lot fewer, 80% fewer waste truckloads. So that contributes.
I think we need to be a little careful about some of these prohibitions, like, Doug, I totally hear you on the solar and the big windows. What if that house was totally 100% net zero offsetting through massive solar panels? The solar gain through the windows, would you really say no matter what? You can't have the
No, I
windows.
didn't say you couldn't have it, I just think that the words, one didn't want to maximize passive solar gain is what I'm saying.
Right,
That's
but
what I
I
heard,
mean,
is the wording is
The
imprecise.
wording, I think it's.
I think it's recommended, but if the house is totally offsetting their operating energy through their on-site stuff, I get on that flexibility.
And that's into performance standards too, that's a direct, this is even all a great segues, and I could make out how that we should be developing.
Most of the sites that I've seen in want to be developed now are sites that probably never would have been approved for anything. Back 35 or 40 years ago. Is there a vehicle that you could use? Take some of these sites that basically are so constrained, you could put a garden shed on, and just take a lot of inventory. And either use it as a TDR opportunity and compensate the existing owner, or otherwise, because there's one that we're looking at now from a metric point of view that is looks like gas tank. It's straight up and down, and I can't even visualize. I've done plenty of stuff on horrible places. And time and money is always the equation, right? We're talking rock and steep and dry, and arid, and the whole nine yards. And I think the example you guys used right when you did go down about Cougar Canyon was a great description of what
the future looks like in the land use. Some of these are just,
Right,
how do you get a permit?
raise your voice.
Oh, sorry, I'm just saying, Suzanne, there are sites that have existed now in the county since 1970s. That today would not be a buildable lot, period. Under most circumstances. But the opportunity to build on these sites is great because they can flip them over for, you know, twice what they've got in them at the end of the day. So it's really a challenge. And it's a challenge to the community that these lots are in because they're completely sort of out of place almost. Ridgeline reviews, all this other stuff that comes up. And if there was a way to just say, okay, we're gonna compensate whoever's here and let them build a house someplace else. It would be, in my mind, another step in these development standards that strengthens, you know, is this really a buildable site?
Rick, I'm gonna try to answer your question with a question. Is this a development standard or is it an FAR?
This is, well, we currently have a provision in the land use code that allows those constrained sites to sell a TDR, to sell the development right and get that benefit. So that it's currently addressed in the land use code. There may be some other tools that could also be applied, but that one does exist today and it is used.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that helps.
So, well, in that case, you go through a process. I've never dealt with a constrained site before. You go through a process, you get denied. And your only opportunity is to sell off the TDR, sue.
Well,
That's another thing.
well, actually, the constrained site provision lives as under the TDR provisions of the code. It's one of the exemptions, it's a TDR, it's an exemption that allows you to come forward of your own volition to ask for a TDR because you know your site is too constrained. On parcels that are denied, are denied development as a result of land use review, those probably, unless the applicant is interested in following up to obtain a TDR, there may be legal actions that ensue or other avenues taken, but Cindy, right?
So you can't force someone into
No.
a
typically,
determination of
somebody-
a constraint site.
If we deny a lot, it is then potentially a takings. And then, I have seen the negotiations with that end up in providing a TDR. So it's another way of getting there. The other thing that you asked was whether or not your question, Rick, was a square footage question versus anything else. And it reminds me of an earlier discussion where not only were we talking about slopes, reducing the amount of square footage available to a lot, we talked about constraints potentially reducing the amount of square footage based on whatever that constraint might be. We kind of gave it up a little early on the square footage reduction part because it's really hard to get to. But it was out there as a discussion, like, okay, 50% of my lot is winter elk winter elk feeding area habitat. So if I have 50%, should my square footage go down to reduce the impacts? Kind of thing. When you get into the very constrained lots, are there other things that you guys would bring up that should reduce the impacts on that lot? Just a
Hey,
question.
sorry to interrupt. I just got a text from Barb who says she's outside and the door is locked.
Oh,
Thanks, Michael.
thanks. And we saw her in that. If you'd like to. Green.
Sorry, just to follow up, for redevelopment opportunities, some of these older subdivisions that are on steep slopes, we have limited infrastructure. That's where this equation could come in, so the demo scrape and replace kind of idea, there's an existing 3,500 square foot house on a lot, that can accommodate 3,500 square foot. That could be the standard for redevelopment of that parcel. It would still be worth more than the existing 3,500 square foot that's there. Right, this one, so that's kind of,
That's interesting.
look at it, you know, from the point of view of what we have to provide to them, resource wise. We're tapped out with the sprinklers we have in a particular area. If we redevelop and everybody gets another couple thousand feet with existing, we're gonna have, you know, some problems.
So what I'm hearing you say is, let's identify what a constrained lot is, there'll be other things that might go into it. And then potentially limit the size of the development that's on it today, rather than allowing that to pop out to the maximum floor area originally. So thought, okay,
Okay, thank you.
thank,
I'd like to suggest an additional development standard. When the Aspen area community plan was written, there's a lot of language in there about environmentally sensitive areas. But I would like to suggest that without getting into granular details. I have, it's kind of like what I was describing before about the Red Star and all the other ridge lines you brought up. There are a number of exemptions even that are given. And I think it goes against what we're really trying to protect, these environmentally sensitive areas. So not defining it now, but at least using that language. It's not just wildlife, it's much more than that.
Great, thank you. We will certainly take a look at that. So, all right. Performance standards.
So performance standards again, are welcome, we're going line by line, our performance standards, we started with the tiering system. So we're going through, hopefully with some of those ones we've already interrogated pretty early to get move through them and get onto the fun stuff with square footage. But performance standards, very similar to what we saw last time with the integration of the tiering system, really requiring all homes to be all electric and powered with 100% renewable. You can see the standards here that are very similar to what you all have reviewed in the past as being bold and going hard at the performance standards. The tiering system applies very similarly to development standards. Tier 1, you must meet all updated performance standards, and renewable energy storage can be accomplished within the building footprint. Tier 2, again, that baseline code is met with some more renewable energy storage on site with the community. And the tier 3 on 11, beyond meeting all the requirements, including all internal amenity load and external amenity and energy usage, renewable energy and storage is on site and within the community, and then must account for additional embodied carbon impacts of building materials above 5750. So again, the tiering system, maybe there's a fourth tier that's added. It sounds like we can explore that. But any comments on performance standards and how it all?
Just a clarification, in the first one, did you mean require all homes or require all new homes?
What we've heard today is definitely new homes. I would put it back to this committee to
I
clarify.
mean, we're not gonna require, we can't require all homes. I mean, we're not gonna require my house to go all electric. I'm not doing it, it's only 70 tops, right, the new houses, I think that's.
I think
Yes,
that's the intent. Yeah, important word.
thank you.
Thanks, Randy.
Wouldn't that be new building and redevelopment areas?
Yeah, let's go with Blake and then Chris and then Bo.
Well, I just figured, is August on? Because I do,
no,
our heat pumps really, I was heard that heat pumps are, they kind of, a lot of them. Have a low ambient temperature, they don't really work with the drought between 30 degrees, so we kind of. At a point where the technology can support that, I know a lot of people are head in that direction, but I'd just be curious if August had a take on it.
He was on earlier and like he dropped off, but I know we've had some discussions about the heat pump stuff as well.
Yeah, taking notes.
Yeah, we'll ask August and give us a little info on that. It's a good point, Chris.
I mean, just for comment quickly, I'm not an expert, but I'm on the state energy code board and all this is a lot of what we're talking about. And all the input we're getting from the best experts in the state are telling us that, what, you know, like the current heat pumps are like totally capable of basically working on the companies in Colorado, including all the ones. But again, not an expert, but there's like a lot of good, really good people there, and I think Cheryl, I just need to check all of these, and there's one client to get over to you. On the performance standard, just a couple of comments, I was gonna figure on the first one, like the new, and then I had a redeveloped question mark. Love the amenity loads one. The third one, the on-site, I obviously can't speak for Brian and believe us, but I think it would be worth checking in with them, because from what I understand, just from other folks in the energy space, is that their new rate structure is kind of like discouraging distributed and provide fewer incentives. So like, I don't know, but just something to look at.
And maybe just a quick response, Brian did share some of his, and so this, we have talked about on-site and the community base. So not to speak,
Yeah.
really to answer that, but this is reflected in the conversation with him.
Sweet,
Or-
okay, and like it works.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and the new system, it's different than the old system, granted, than where you gotta install the system, you gotta standard rebate, you gotta get meter and they revised it to make it more of they pay for the energy you generate as opposed to everything, which includes the wires and voice charges. So they're just revising the way they offer to pay for on-site renewable energy.
I would have guessed you guys were on it. Just wanted to make sure, because I know it's a bit of a new. Thanks.
I think there will be some mitigation in this.
For the form of the question, if I really know which is cheaper right now, electric or gas?
Yes, I mean, electric.
And is this going to apply to housing as well? Why I'm asking that question?
We do have a new section on housing. I think one of the things we're seeing a lot for affordable housing is a lot of those developers are using them as models to say, we can go all electric and be at the forefront of sustainability, because it also saves on the utility costs.
Right, the renewable part of that. I mean, I think it's more complicated than just to say gas is cheaper, electric is cheaper right now, and because it does depend on the type of building you have and what's insulated and just, but if you look at, you know, the straight costs of gas can fluctuate quite a bit and electricity typically stays, you know, stays pretty flat, goes up gradually, gas is fluctuated. So it's really hard to say gas is cheaper, electric is cheaper. I mean, in the long term, the ideally is that you have electrically heated buildings that will be competitive with any other prices to offer.
And I would add, Cliff, that the verbiage right now says require all new homes. So I think the way it's drafted, it could easily apply to affordable housing units, it's new residential development. So if you think that is onerous, or whether there should be a call out specific to affordable affordable housing, you know, that's something to consider.
I mean, you're gonna build 277 units near the airport. And if this code were enacted before they actually dig in, you're requiring those buildings to be all electric. And the residents who are worker bees to pay that, whatever it is. But I don't have a position on this, I'm not an expert either, but it was worth discussing.
The county can't, in my opinion, the county can't implement this and then say no for employee housing. I mean, that's just easy. There's no way.
There is an issue though, a little bit of jurisdictional shopping on these developments, because some of the covenants and design guidelines that are in place for a couple of projects in the Mid Valley that aren't taken are very stringent. But then they go to the building permit process where the entity is gonna come in and build the structure. And they're relieved of those standards due to the fact that they can pay litigation fees, so that some of the standards that have evolved here are high. But the government, the entities that approve permitting and land use are allowing mitigation to replace those standards, that some of them compromise those standards. So, you know, we're kind of sitting here, Pickett County is right there, and we're in Eagle, and that's kind of one of the things I think, you know, we can have that conversation sometime with someone from over there, because that's causing a real headache for a guy about 3 miles away.
Rick, that's a really good point, and if we don't already have it in the final road, the not get additional consideration. We've talked so much about the North Regional partnerships, I think that's a great example of you stressing that out on more than just the housing policies, but on really all of this. Any other questions on performance standards, or should we move into GMQS?
Well, renewable energy should be used, wait.
Sorry?
Sorry, I was reading the wrong one.
And the discussion question, should tiers apply to redevelopment and additions? Of course. Yeah.
Yes.
We're gonna have standards. Not if you're redeveloping a house, you're not gonna need.
So thank you, that's the key discussion.
That's mine.
Yeah, I think at the top of page 10, should peers apply to redevelopment and of course, you know, we've got a yes, of course, any other thoughts on that? Yeah, and we've got some comments, so yeah, if you want to read what we got from there.
Yeah, so he said, yes, it's great. What is considered a demolished home? Is there a better way to establish this threshold? And he said, no, if it's a remodel or a smaller addition, this needs to be defined better.
So just some definition on what we mean when we say redevelopment or additions. Yeah,
Just curious on the requirement to meet 100% renewable energy. How does that go with Holy Cross? If Holy Cross is providing you 50% wind power, is that 50% of your electric power is renewable?
If your home is all electric, I would imagine that, yes, would be that. So,
So if I understand this, these are the two standards that you were referring to for GMQS, two major categories, development and building standards. Performance standards. Scoring in the past at an area that I bring up again for discussion, a standard for community benefits.
And I think that, gosh, you know, it gets so kind of technical, but, when we say new standards for a special review system or whatever, in tier 3, the expectation is that you're going beyond, you know, you're doing more, you have to do more in terms of offsetting or extinguishing impacts. And so they may be totally new kinds of standards that we haven't thought about before. Something that I keep going back to is, okay, let's have direct standards. If you're gonna have a direct impact, because you're building larger, you're gonna have more trips per day. How will you extinguish trips per day? You know, that to me is a new standard. Show us how we're gonna do that.
Offsets.
Well, offset's an interesting word. I don't know. It is truly extinguish it somehow. Don't just, and offset's a good word, I guess.
I just want to say one thing. I think that's a really interesting point. Because that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
We're not trying to accomplish just getting a little bit of money thrown at the fire fund and letting somebody do whatever they want.
Right.
And that's basically what's happened in the past, right? It's given them exemptions. What we're trying to do is actually solve the problem.
And I think that's where that tier 3 comes in so much. Kara's looking at me, funny.
No,
Okay.
Well, maybe here's some clarification I would offer, because I think we're using the same words with different meanings, so maybe. What is thought of as the special review, if I could offer, is not necessarily the word standard, but we're talking about clear criteria that is part of a special review that you can pay your way out of, right? It's addressing other impacts in addition to the new development and performance standards. That it's clear criteria and special review that you have to meet in order to use square footage. Does that help?
I'm not trying to say, let's bring back the fire department road and open space. What I'm saying is affordable housing is a community benefit. There are a lot of bigger areas that are not really included in these other two standards. So what are the responsible ones going to increase the community? But what does the community gain or benefit from? And that was part of exploring. It was very subjective, and I agree, get rid of it, but to some degree, whether it's the arts, whether it's housing, homeless, whatever, mitigating for affordable housing. I don't know the answers to this. I just think that that's a standard that may or possibly could be part of the process.
And I just wanted to, so to clarify, under the square quota row, and this is getting at without specificity, so we can start to work on specificity, is that we're adding in criteria for waste, criteria for traffic, criteria for affordable housing and employee generation. So those would all be part of the criteria in special review. Does that help explain what you're getting at?
Yeah.
And where does that fall under square footage, did you say?
It's the square footage choice.
But we'll just go along with the other plans, so I think that there is like a lot of infrastructure costs that are going to need to be accounted for, and like a road cut is, could be, by the time you read asphalt, it could be $10,000-15,000, and the people are gonna have to be, so if people want to retrofit houses, it seems like a good use of these funds, because, I think it's doing a lot of good. It's not like, you're just putting solar off like a pool, you're actually enabling someone to get electric power and then change the source of their energy. So I think there is a lot of good in that. I think it's could be in here somewhere.
Like, that's a great point, and I think Christie's gonna love to hear that on page 17, the mitigation impact fees. One of the recommendations is evaluate if existing impact fees, road renewable energy and affordable housing should be revised to capture more impacts and help funds into those energy retrofits and stuff. So, Blake, does that address the? Okay.
And we're keeping the cash in lieu.
I'm gonna look to someone who knows more about that.
I'm not sure, we're keeping the mitigation programs.
Potentially expand.
And potentially expanding or changing them.
Did you say you're not sure that you're keeping mitigation?
No, we are keeping mitigation programs.
And potentially expanding.
What? There is an affordable housing mitigation fee, and there's no suggestion that that's gonna go away at the moment, but there's a suggestion that it be reevaluated and to determine whether it should be changed in any way or not to address the issues that are raised. So does that mean, someone could build something that needed, there's no way around it, but you need to mitigate something and say, he's not providing affordable housing on the site, and he's not actually building somewhere else, but he's going to give you a bucket underneath.
Yeah, I think that's how you state the standard, the criteria. So you could get into 3 or 4, whatever you can call it, that we can't pay, you have to build it on site. That's our rule. You know?
Because if it's only money that he gives, he or she either, then we don't, and that's that money is gonna say, this is to provide housing for 10 people,
For now.
then where is the county going to build it?
And I would suggest, and I'm gonna bring up Christie's point of, I think that that needs more discussion from this committee, right? Because I think we've heard 2 different sides and 2 different perspectives that I would suggest when we get to the mitigation piece, have the committee kind of get their 2 aspects of it.
I'm leaving June 4th.
Well, that's good. So. Yes.
We have a bullet in here and it really doesn't have any teeth in it, but I think it just, I mean, it says or out of affordable. And so I think what we need to do is come up with some recommendations that we feel are substantial.
What page you on? Could that come?
I'm sorry, page 16 under housing costs. I get out a list of items that relate to housing.
For the bullet, right?
Yes.
And Bill, did you have a comment?
No, I don't at this point.
Okay, sorry, I think I was just picking up some background noise from you. And I saw you were unmuted. So we'll move forward to GMQS. And the square footage quota system. So these are kind of 2 very related pieces. So on page 11, and I'm going to advance this for everyone here. You'll see the GMQS really is maintained and strengthened as a tool for pacing new subdivision and development by removing the square footage competition and creating the square footage quota system, allowing GMQS to really account for some of the potential unintended consequences that we were discussing with the risk of subdivision. So maintaining it there just specifically to manage that, and city, you are much more fluent in this than I am, so. If I miss anything, let me know.
This prevents the 35-acre subdivision of large parcels, for one thing.
And so the reason we did this is it's an opportunity to add affordable housing to the scoring system. It's a simplification, believe it or not. I know for me, when I heard about it, I was like, wait, it took me a minute to understand the change to the structure, but designed to simplify and really give GMQS more teeth in providing local control too. Some of the legislation we're seeing at the state level, the GMQS system does also provide potential avenues for maintaining some of that local control. So keeping it in there, and then creating the square footage quota system, which we'll get into next, unless there are questions on GMQS.
Just real quickly, one of the things we encounter is vested rights. When rights are granted to a land use applicant, it's 3 years, 5 years, whatever the negotiation is. Often we see it pacing doesn't happen as the expectations were set and the approval was there. So you see projects coming back in 3 or 4 or 5 years later, seeking an extension of vested rights, and the whole project's changed. And market forces, all that stuff comes into play. And one of the things we run into, I think, is in the bigger projects that do get delayed, you can see it right out the window here. You end up with more impact, and you end up with higher costs, and you end up with less affordability, and all kinds of things happen. So I don't know how that gets put into play here, but if someone's gonna let their vested rights expire or get to the point where they have to come back for another public process, they should have some guarantees or bond or some in the performance standards and say, look, you know, this is what we bought off, this is what you sold us. And this is what we want to see. Now, why is it morphing into something else?
A project, if you're changing the project and you're under a certain vested rights, then you have to go back through a public process and pick and count. You don't just get to change it and keep your vested rights. We look at that and say, have things changed since you got this approval? Oh, well, you need to upgrade this and you need to upgrade that to the new code, if you're outside of your vesting. Or if you want to change your project, you're going to a whole nother set of public hearings.
So if someone did come in and you wanted to see affordable housing built quickly. For example, if someone's gonna build it off-site or on-site, that would maybe come first. Or take a priority position over what they might do on the rest of it. Because a lot of times what they want to do is build a free market first and then the affordable housing and then somehow it gets caught in a, spin cycle. It's what asking for.
Yeah, I built the condos, but not the affordable housing.
So I'm just trying to, maybe there's a way to incentivize, if you get that approval and you have 3 years, you should have a start point that's sort of in there. Says, yeah, I'm gonna complete this phase of the project by a date certain and get them in the ground. You know, and especially when it comes to this effort to partner up on affordable housing stuff, because that's where somebody could, I think it's a private developer and transfer that mitigation or whatever to a site that might have 500 people want to partner up with. We can't get that pool going. You know?
So the criteria are that site specific, project specific negotiation. Currently, it sounds like it's site specific negotiation.
Yeah, maybe some part of that, especially
We can be written as a criteria, is me what I'm hearing question is.
Sounds like a question.
does. And I think one of the key questions here is should the current new development and redevelopment quota allotments be evaluated to determine, are those sufficient? Do we want to keep with those quota allotments, or should they be reevaluated?
Well, the quota allotments currently are 3%, is that right?
No, it's on page.
This is on page 11, and this is the quota allotments for the number of units built or sustained substantially redeveloped in the previous year. Is this more of a square footage quota system question, or is this the G? I feel like we're playing a tricky game there.
So there is a current allotment for subdivision that is, I don't think in here, we can pull that in, and then the square footage allotment is in the following row.
Okay, I was confused. Yeah, the 2.47% that you're referring to, like the 3% or whatever, that is the number of new lots that can be created in any given year, but that's lots versus square footage.
And there's a similar question. Put it down next page.
0.47% of what?
The baseline that was established in the number of units that we had when Gordon Manor started in 1974.
Oh,
Yeah, and Joe actually did the math for that. So, yeah.
Got a new opportunity for you, Jeff.
But we never really see subdivision, so it never really gets used much.
So I think that's a good parking lot question. I mean, the 2.47% number, I don't think we discussed as a group yet, so that's. But
I was just looking at this 5,000 square feet within the UGB under allotments. Is that in addition to what the city allows, or is that the same thing?
This is unincorporated Pickens County within the UGB.
Oh, so it's only unincorporated. Yeah, because that seems like a pretty small number of people.
And that's true for all of these recommendations, where we're only in the unincorporated portions of Pickens County for everything we talk about, that's our boundary, but the importance of regional partnerships, so there's not jurisdictional shopping is an important recommendation. I know this too, and Cliff just moved us right at this early. So I'm gonna, unless there's anything else I'm doing to us, I'm gonna keep us moving into the square.
through these meetings, one of the things that I've heard again and again from everybody here, most people here, is why are we getting so many exemptions? We need to really tighten for exemptions. And can you explain to me how retaining cash in lieu for affordable housing is not an exemption?
It's not an exemption.
So,
Well, it's not free.
yeah.
What?
You're,
There's a consequence, you have to pay for it. So it's not exempt.
So does this group think it works? You know, cash in lieu program for, I mean, if you're not gonna dump affordable housing on your side, you give them a bunch of money, and then what are they gonna do?
Decarbonize. They're gonna, one of the ideas is to support solar panels. I don't know about that.
And I think Suzanne, to your point, the special review criteria here are key pieces to incentivize, more things we want to do more of and address impacts from waste, traffic, affordable housing was one of the key pieces of the special review to begin to close some of those loopholes and remove the exemptions, force more people through the system with that special review to address the key things like affordable housing. Does that make sense? Okay, yeah, that's, okay, good, awesome.
So are you suggesting that we just make the recommendation or eliminate the cash in lieu of housing?
Well, because I'm over here as an international observer, I can only ask my questions in acting to clarify.
Okay.
And we're doing.
I like it.
Thank you,
Yeah, okay, I did.
Well, can you answer a question? Is the cash in lieu used far more often? What percent is it used than the mitigation? It's kind of like the TDR program. It's the automatic default, right? Cash in lieu.
Okay. Well,
Yes.
yeah, it's just a affordable housing impact fee. We're not impressing with our current code for you to build. You know, and that's that, or for you to buy it.
I would suggest because there's a lot of energy, and I think it's a great conversation around housing. We have it. I think let us bring back this data around how our housing needs now, and you guys discuss, because we did make changes. Someone in here probably knows 2 years ago that have dramatically changed, and it's funding the county participating in housing, not at a regional level, but it's allowing us to participate in housing that we wouldn't be able to otherwise right now.
So it sounds like there'd be a recommendation.
I think, yeah, it sounds like a practical thing for the group to discuss.
Great.
I just want a quick question. So the impact fees for housing that get paid now, do they just get sucked up into the general fund? They're dedicated, they stay, they go out to sort of as mix of that, or how does it get out?
It is only for a capital investment in housing. So it was used for the purchase of Phillips Trailer Park. It was used for the partnership for Basalt Vista. It's used for buying down individual units that we use as rental, to community members. So.
So, are we talking about mitigation for square footage now? I mean, is that? I'd like to see traffic mitigation to go up to the top of the list. And, I have proposed in my ideal scenario, but fleshing this out, that, every construction site have a detailed, traffic and parking plan. And that we set the parameters of what that must be. Also that every job site, whether it's redevelopment or brand new, have on-site job boxes. Someone told me that New York City does something like this. I don't know anything about it, but it sounds like a very good. The argument is people need their trucks because all their tools are there. So how do we get around that? And then the traffic mitigation fees to really make those exorbitant and high to penalize the construction traffic.
It would seem like that would be something that would tack with tier 3 and or tier 4.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say, right now, we have a road impact fee today. That is to pay for capital improvements to our roads based on the amount of traffic that they get and that kind of thing. Am I hearing you propose a traffic,
It's how to cut down on the BTMs.
right? Okay, so that's new, and that's something that I think we ought to note here, because just like John was saying, we're trying to address the impacts. You know, what is happening, so how do you address the number of trips, not the damage to the road so much? So that's what I'm hearing you say, we gotta look at that.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. There may, some of the ideas that came up were carpooling or electric vehicles or some of that. So you're suggesting, I mean, if there's a fee, there's kind of an incentive. It's the stick, if you will, to get people who are traveling to construction sites out of their cars and reduce the amount of trips that they're making in.
Yeah, I think incentivize it rather than penalize it,
Yeah.
that industry. So, and carpooling, I think the answer to is.
Right, the workers come up with their own ways of meeting that, or the construction company wants to have in the homeowner side.
I'll add, sorry, Michael here, that there, there are some underfunded initiatives, like if you read the conversation, I think from the Aspen City Council meeting about who should fund a summertime Aspen to Snowmass direct route rather than having it be a 2-bus ride. And there was debate about who should fund it. And I think, RAFTA potentially going fare free, the full length of the valley. There are underfunded goals around transportation that some of this money could find its way to.
Michael, thank you. And Tim, I think you're really starting to talk about some of the special review criteria, that every construction site has a self-construction plan, things like that. So, Chris.
Well, I know we might not be there. I really like Tim's concept. I guess from what I'm hearing, it's kind of talking about the construction phase of projects. And I know, from our data, we're seeing that a lot of EMTs, are from employee generation associated with, micro economies, like 20 FTEs per day, working in some of these large homes. So I wonder if there's a similar concept that applies in like a rep style formula structure, the BMT generation, and that's related to house size.
Just a quick tag on, Tim's addressing traffic during construction. Well, stop to think about, how many times Deb Kelly has brought up all the workers and stuff that are servicing the houses. And so this, again, it kind of tracks with tier 3 and tier 4. That maybe there's got to be some traffic mitigation for the as-built house according to size, not just the construction. And again, it could be that can fit right in tier 3, tier 4.
That's great. Great idea.
There could be an incentive for using electric vehicles, perhaps.
Or vans, the contractors using vans.
Yeah, carpooling, and right.
And that's something we're incentivizing contractors having their own vans. If you help mitigate, let's say you have less road mitigation fees in exchange for having a van that picks up their employees in Newcastle and brings them here and brings them home. Rather than hit over the hammer over that, it makes more sense to me to incentivize it.
Yeah, and work special review.
Question, Randy, were you talking about the, I'm still, my mind's still boggled by the 22% of the people that aren't coming up Valley are serving mega houses? Is that what you're talking about? So
I mean,
once-
basically you got
pre-completion,
Right.
which is construction, and then you got post-completion. And both of them, and that's what we've been talking about how the bigger houses generate a lot more vehicle
Right.
trips and services and stuff.
That's great. How does a land use code get to that? I mean,
So I think there's two things I'm hearing that we can for you all to discuss is, one is integrating, I'm hearing two different levers to pull, right? So one is what's in your special review criteria of, you have to have some kind of traffic plan and long-term management plan. And then the other lever that could be pulled is some, like our other mitigation fees, right? If you're beyond some threshold, and you can't mitigate it, then there's some mitigation fee for something that's not just the impact of the road, but the actual traffic impacts that are, so there are two levers that I think are really nice.
Yeah, that sounds like it. And then, I mean, I think Chris had a good suggestion for the rent style, like, because then that goes to your point, Christie, if they end up paying in rather than doing what you want them to do, those funds could be used to incentivize EVs.
I'm sorry, I have a lot of questions, but I agree, that's awesome, but, and you don't have to answer this. But let's say there's criteria and you build a 10,000 square foot house, tier 3 or 4, and then you have this plan and you say to mitigate traffic or whatever, we're gonna do this, this, and this. Who monitors that? Where's the I really am, I don't really know. What enforces it? Yeah, is it enforceable?
During, I think what you have to do in land use world is you have to estimate, like, okay, it's a 10,000 square foot house, so we estimate that there's gonna be X amount of traffic that's generated by the post-construction part of the house and the pre-construction part of the house. The pre-construction or construction part is pretty easy to monitor because we've got a building permit that we can go and yank if somebody's not doing it right. The post-construction part of that has somewhat to do with the uses that are allowed in that house, and that ties back. So if somebody's doing a short-term rental, and we said, sorry, you can't do short-term rentals there, then we got that lever. You know, there are various levers within the system, but you're right, I mean, monitoring and all that is tough, so that's why it's been so easy to do cash in lieu on a lot of things, because then the community does it on a larger scale, tries to mitigate it on a larger scale. But I think, as Suzanne was pointing out, it's like, well, who mitigates anymore? It's just harder and harder and harder to mitigate when the fees are there. Where are we going to buy whatever it is to mitigate? So I think that it's going to take some more work to really think through who monitors that. But I think that this group's going to get there. It's going to be, we're going to have to figure it out.
And if I may, the hope is that we incentivize the smaller homes through the tiered process and other methodologies to reduce the traffic impacts in that manner, right? So you're incentivized to build a smaller home, that traffic is thereby reduced by virtue of the fact that it's a smaller home. So that's one thing, you know, we're providing an incentive there, but we are allowing, if we do allow for larger homes, then then how do you enforce mitigation? It's a great question.
But there actually is the little carpool passes you used to pull out on the side of the airport, and there's a little hut there. You could have somewhere people just scan you in and keep a record of, you know, all the carpool that you're doing. And I think it's something you could track, you know, it's insurmountable.
There's a lot of things.
Pre-completion.
Yeah, or even if it's carpooling, or if you're bringing up landscaping, you pull in, you got 5 people in the car, you.
Does the carpooling system work? Does anyone know?
It depends on what you're talking about. I mean, some contractors have it down and others don't. You know, it's a matter of, you know, individual listing. I mean, some property management companies have it down, and some don't. You know, it's just, how do we incentivize it and make it more standard? But something that triggered me, Brian, with what you were saying was something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is the fees, Christie, are then somebody else has to make it happen, you know, kind of thing. Whereas the thought that has been coming about in this group for me is direct mitigation. You know, it's like, if you take the affordable housing part of it, you know, sorry, we're not gonna take the money, because then we have to go find a place to build and make that happen. So we're just gonna require that you build it, or that you buy it down. It's already there in town, and you buy it down and you restrict it. Or in the case of vehicle miles traveled, maybe it's a situation where you actually buy down vehicle miles traveled by buying down what could generate that in another part of the community. So it's an offset, if you will, but it's an extinguishing of those rights overall in the community. So that's where my mind's going with it, but it's more of a direct, you know, okay, you're building this, it has this impact. You have to directly mitigate that in order to be able to build it.
I completely agree with that. I think the idea that we're gonna hold people accountable or tell them that they have to follow a traffic management plan and that we're gonna have a traffic cut off there watching them is unrealistic. Just like it's probably unrealistic to tell somebody to put in an efficient boiler and that we're gonna look at their meter. So I think the more we can do that kind of direct work, whether it's incentivizing carpooling or electric vehicles, or maybe that fee goes straight into putting more buses on the road for people that don't have cars. Or building trains or whatever it might be, but I completely agree with that concept, because I think asking people to do the right thing and hoping that it's gonna happen is unrealistic.
Yeah, we,
Rick and Lindsay?
yeah, just to comment on the vans, this was a decade ago, we bought 3 of those, we had one started Fuda, one started Parachute, one started like 14 passenger vans, the 5 guys left at the shop. And we, what we did was reduce their pickup trucks, made us park at the shop, ride up in the vans, and get their trucks and go up. But because of the commerce and where we were, the other thing we dealt with was the use tax, 3% use tax. 50% of our projects were exempt from use tax because they were public or nonprofit. So there's kind of a gap there, I think, that exists with, it doesn't relate to growth, but it relates to expansion. So if you have Pandora's, for example, we can expand, that's out of the equation of a single family home. An expansion of the hospital is out of the equation of a single family home. And those projects create just as much demand for offset materials. All of our materials started coming from carbon pits. The concrete is coming from 50% of our materials were being delivered to job sites that were not collecting 3% use tax. We looked at that and like, this is interesting. And, because our other customers, like Hanson, were passing that 3% through to their residential customers. The other one is we do have road impact fees set up in one subdivision that we managed based on kind of a rational nexus of square footage of house that we compared to Starwood, Woodland Creek, a bunch of other stuff. So we collect, right now we collect $2 a square foot. It goes, so if we have a 10,000 square foot, their road impact fee is $20,000. And what we did is we looked at the road system that was impacted by it. We looked at the 5-year capital plan, that road system, and we estimated the cost going forward. And we looked at the 13 and 14 projects, and we've just been collecting these road impact fees over a couple of 3 years now. We built up a fund of about $100,000. And also just other capital money we've been able to set aside to be able to accommodate a full overlay of the subdivision over a period of time. So there's some science behind it. Construction management plans and those kinds of things. with technology now to be able to track who's in what vehicle or where they're going is unbelievable. We had a system in our trucks, we could tell a guy, hey, you stopped at Jimbo's on the way home. You know, that's not authorized, you can't have it on the hall. And I go, yeah, this is so red out. And it was like Big Brother, when we reduced our fuel consumption from 5,500 gallons of diesel a week to about 4,000. By instituting this, and that determined 20% reduction in that cost.
And that's
So and this is old technology, this isn't like the technology that's available today, so I think, you know, when you have a qualified contractor, they're required to have these kinds of systems in their pickups and trucks, and dump trucks, whatever they're driving. Even to the point of view of equipment on a job site, where you can tell them idling, going backwards or forwards, and you're productive work. And, you know, it did incentivize our employees to really pay attention, because those savings went into their pocket, not our pocket.
And I think, Rick, you're kind of identifying, taking it back to Jared's comment about the two tools, you know, we've got the special review criteria, and then we've got the mitigation funds, but then also kind of making that business case too, for why some of these things make sense. So I think that, yeah, that's a really good point, Lydia.
So this has nothing to do with construction or the staffing, traffic, but just because of where we live, and we encourage so much recreation activities, recreation creates an enormous amount of traffic that I don't know how you can control. I personally live on the Prince Creek Road, and the open space and trails, bikes, track paths that they put in on the ground has created an overload of cars. And we had someone from Cleveland County come on, I don't remember the gentleman's name. And, you know, several of us got together and like, the traffic here is ridiculous, and people are going way too fast. We had the police come up and they monitored how fast people were going on their bikes even, and they were going like 30 miles an hour and on the hill. And so I'm not, and the only reason I brought that up is because the gentleman said, this isn't just Prince Creek Road, this is everywhere, you know, across Pickens County. So I know the monitoring construction traffic and staffing traffic is an issue, but recreational traffic has got to be huge. I'm sure you have numbers on how many people drive to the ski area from down valley to up valley, and biking trails everywhere, not to mention all the other recreations. So I know that's something you might consider.
I think it's a really good point. We spend a lot of time talking about construction traffic, but recreational traffic, I mean, it's not just an issue here, and just like I said, so thank you. So, on the square footage quota system, this is one of those we're gonna put a pin in, we have the full group to really answer the question, but similar to the allotment question on GNQS, you'll see on the fourth bullet down what the current annual quota allotments are for new development, in the UGB, remaining in the county, and then for additions. So, one item we'll discuss as we're going through it next time is, you know, should we be thinking about changing these allotments?
Where did those numbers come from? But so just made, I mean, somehow I understand they're in the code, but what's the rationale?
Sorry.
A bunch of buttons on the computer.
Well, I have to ask Suzanne Wolf to help me remember that, or maybe Ellen can, but, okay, she can.
No, I think they were based on averages that we were seeing on an annual basis over a period of time.
I'm just curious about where the numbers came from.
Yeah. For a while, we had a lot more square footage available, it wasn't being used, and, so it got reduced. I think just 2 years ago.
So,
I will say what's in the packet, and it's not hyperlinked, but we did pull the utilization numbers between EDR landing of square footage and, the current system of landing square footage, so you can see how it's been utilized. I think it goes back 10 or 15 years on that.
so How much, I mean, was 28,750 square feet of new building built in 2022? I have no idea, I have no concept of this.
Right, so the next column, the 22, that second to last bullet point shows 22 utilization, and it's not in that very script, but that's 5,000 square feet through GMQS and 5,000 square feet through CDRs.
So only 10,000 to 20, like the 28 or the 39, or we need to have all those numbers.
It's the 10,000 out of the, and I can't remember, of the 28,000 per new building.
Thanks.
And so the fact that it was, the square footage wasn't being used, isn't that really reflective of the popularity of the TDR program?
Yeah. It says there's 10,000.
Yeah, the numbers in here, so that whole document and shows a comparison of how TDRs have been landed over the past two, so it shows both where square footage has been landed in TDR or in the growth management system.
So that's probably a really helpful resource to read then before our next discussion.
Yeah, otherwise these numbers are underreported. Okay, thank you.
Because
Got a kind of a question clarification, so. We're saying, I mean, it says new development, and it talks about 28,750 and 11,500 in the UGB and 1750. As I understand it, this is the clarification. It's not a new house, it's something that, it's a new subdivision that I got this land, I got the potential to add another lot, and I'm coming in for another 5,750 square feet. That is the new development. It's not just like a new house. Right? It literally is new created development.
not necessarily, I mean, we're mixing it here though, you're right, because right now, growth management is either for new development, new subdivision, and you have to get your square footage for that. Or you can come in and say, I'm not gonna buy TDR, I've got a 6,000 square foot.
Right, I'm just going to compete for my additional square footage. But isn't that the additions?
I think the new development is new starts, right? It is new residences, not just
So
necessarily.
additions, you're right.
Yes, it's not necessarily a new development, right, on a newly created lot, although it could include that. Is that right? Is that-
Where's Glenn?
Yeah, there was Susan.
Spring break, but I will tell you the numbers came from the current allocation in the code for GMQS.
Right.
So maybe Glenn can give some clarity here.
And that's,
Can you give us some clarity, Glenn?
I don't quite understand the question. You got new development is if there's not an existing house and it's base floor area, and then there's additional floor area. So I don't get it.
So there was only 10,000 square feet of new construction in the county in 2022. That's what I'm reading.
No.
I think you can help with
That's
that.
how it goes through growth management.
So,
I think Suzanne is our best person to answer a lot of these questions. Because the numbers that are pulled are from the utilization at the end of 2022, and I think there's more specificity that she probably does.
Everything at 5750 wasn't counted.
Correct.
That's.
It's everything above 5750, that's a great clarification.
There's a lot more development.
I was gonna say, it's more than 10,000.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And they didn't go to TDRs.
You know, it says here 5,000 through GMQS and 5,000 from TTRs. Well,
We had two homes at P and Z, both wanting to add 3,000 square feet. The homes were already at 6, so they're going from 6 to 9.
It's addition.
That's what came to a competition at P and Z while I was there, among others. But, so that's not, I wouldn't call that new development, that's a home and putting on an addition. And that was more. They didn't both win 3,000 square feet, but they could have easily. Which is more than 5, but I don't think, Red Mountain is not in the UGB. It is. So this 5,000 makes no sense. They came to us looking for 6. Well, actually, only one of us got 3. The other one got out to overbuy a CPR.
So there,
We'd like to,
Yeah, like, well, just would it be possible to get a little clarification before the meeting, so if.
Yeah.
yeah, like that's exactly what we were gonna say.
yeah, because you're spot on, we can try to figure it out, but I mean, we just go directly to the source, we'll get the answer. So, yeah, thank you. All right.
Yeah, that's a resource we'll share out and have the discussion next time. And with 15 minutes remaining, what do you think? Should we try to get through TDRs and overlay this or directly? Do you think we could do it?
Try.
One more thing here with these categories, new development, UGB additions. You're not taking into consideration rural areas versus more, I mean, not just UGB versus. The county is just remaining county. And I wonder whether, as we go forward, that we're gonna have allotments. That allotments to rural areas be not quite the same as, I would say, more transitional areas.
But that's a great point. That's the discussion question here for the group is if we're gonna have this new allotment system, should we be reevaluating the annual allotments and also where's there? Right, exactly, what the numbers are and the categories. These are just the current categories.
So so next time, what information are we gonna get?
I'm gonna look at Karen City, but it's.
On it, what the utilization is, what the current system is set up to be, and how it's broken up between new development and additions, and then clarification of the definition of new development. We will need to do all that, so then my understanding is at the next meeting, you all can discuss how you might want to change it. Is that fair?
Thank you. I just,
Well, great clarification. So what do you think? What do you
So
all-
I would ask one other thing, is what's the gross square footage that's currently being permitted or whatever? Because if we're gonna change the quota allotment, it'd be interesting to know, there are 100,000 square feet that are currently under construction to 5750. And we're adding another 57, I mean, if you add up these new developments, it's 70,000 square feet, or 5,000 square feet. Or something. So I think we need to know the gross amount of square footage that's under construction.
that's a really great point, thank you, Doug, because we don't know where we're starting from, it's hard to measure it.
Wait. Based on the, so I look at, and I like your question, but how long do you have from you would know this, from the time that you got a permit till the time you have to build? Because are there houses that are under permit but not under construction?
Yeah,
12 months?
you just have to show diligence.
And put a shovel in and move some dirt or something?
But it takes months to break it down, but it's 3 years vested.
Okay,
You've got a month or a year from when the time the permit is issued
okay,
to have a progress inspection. You then have 6 months to have another type of inspection and kind of keep that permit active. If in those timeframes there is no activity, then the permit becomes expired.
so I'd like to add to what Doug said, not just what's under construction, but what's permitted.
Okay. Lots of data. Thank you.
Open permit.
Glenn has his hand up. Could you call on him, please?
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
I was just, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, what I was wondering about is years ago, the way the growth management system was set up annually was you would tally up the exemptions that were allotted in one year. And then in the following year, the exemptions would be used to determine what the quota would be in the next year. And that way you kind of capture everything that's occurring, within a 2 year time frame or maybe a 3 year time frame. And I'm just wondering whether that's something we might want to evaluate again. In other words, you tally up exemptions, or it might be the number of new houses, or number of the quantity of floor area, And that would get deducted from a quota in the future years so that you were managing the growth rate a little bit more. And that kind of dropped by the wayside at one point. But I'm just wondering whether it should maybe be considered again.
Yes, I think that's a great point.
Yes.
Because it kind of helps with the pacing concept that we've been talking about. So, yeah, that would be a good idea.
So that'll allow us to think about the question that we're gonna answer too, and then give you some reaction. Fun, great point. So we now have 8 minutes remaining, and I defer to Madam. Should we sort of wrap this up? Do you want to keep momentum going?
So TDRs and zoning overlay concepts in rural area. We try to tackle that in the next 8 minutes.
Well, I have to be somewhere at 7, so I'm gonna have to leave.
I'd like to know where the 1,000 square foot concept came from. What was the thinking behind that versus what it is presently? When we get into TDRs,
For the TDR,
yeah,
I think it was, I'm just gonna take a stab at it, but I think that was put forth in the scenarios that were submitted online. And we came up with that as
so
an
we
idea.
get the dots on the chart, and that's how we end up with 1,000.
Not just that, what Mona said too.
Yeah, and they asked everybody to submit their optimal scenario into Mavis, and I think she tallied up a lot of the information, and so we came up with 1,000 square feet.
Some people said 15, some said 500, so this is someplace for us to start.
Yeah, so
people that suggested hard numbers, that was the middle.
it was like the 9,300, it was sort of the median.
Well, I get that, but I guess I want to hear from those who suggested 1,000 or even lower. How did they arrive at that figure? What is the rationale? I have my concerns about making sure that we're still getting more donor sites or sentiment sites. And that if you reduce the amount that they're going to get, they may prefer to build 1,000 square foot cabin. I think it depends on the prices. I mean, the price jumped from 300,000 to over $1 billion. Whether that's an anomaly or not, I don't think anybody really knows, but 1,000 square foot might not be enough. That's what it's on its own right. If they're developing within the degree. But I have not heard the rationale for that. I think when I answered it, I thought, keep it at 2,500 and allow them to sell it in increments of 500, so that, let's say a local wants to add 500 square feet to their house, it's an easy way to do it, even if they're, at not going to GMQS.
I'll let Reed talk about the market aspect of,
Well,
all of that, but I can speak to
and
them.
marketing, I believe, if you cut down on the number of units, if you make it smaller, you ultimately make more money, so the TDR. The seller, in theory, should make more money. With smaller increments.
But the smaller increments will save less than land.
Well, I guess when I suggested that, how I did that, but I saw that you get an allotment of 2,500 square feet, but you're allowed to sell it in 500, so you can't sell it.
I want to take this opportunity to agree with Cliff for one of the few times yeah, I like that idea of being able to sell increments, but once you're committed, you're committed. I don't think you can have 500 square feet that you sell off and then you still get to build some cabin or something. I don't know how that could possibly work. But my fear is that at 1,000 square feet, you're just gonna get a lot more cabins. So I'm very concerned that we're gonna force or encourage people to develop their land rather than sell off their rights at 1,000 square feet.
I guess I would ask the question, why should somebody extinguish a 1,000 square foot cabin and get to build 2,500 square feet?
Well, you don't get to build 2,500 square feet, you get the right to sell 2,500 square feet of floor area to someone else, or if they've got another property, they can put it there. It's not a more, the whole idea was to try to incentivize the cabin person to not build the cabin.
Right.
Right? I mean, they might have a great site, but we're giving them an opportunity to make some more money than just building a 1,000 square foot cabin, because we don't want a bunch of 1,000 square foot cabins all over that, asking.
But I have a question about that, because this is what baffles me, is that you can, what you said, you can send 1,000 square feet. So then you say, we don't want all these cabins, but those 1,000 square feet become 10,000 square foot houses. So I don't know, I'm kind of partial to cabins rather than, the 15,000 square foot houses.
Well, we can,
I mean, no, it's a rhetorical question, because I want everybody to send it, but I don't want anybody to receive it.
we want to talk about what's been up till now. I would argue the 10,000 acres that we preserved by saving rural remote sites. Yeah, maybe it ended up that, it was not quite as well defined as we wanted, because development was incentivized in the UGB, and we did end up with 4,750 square feet as the means to incentivize landing a TDR there, or TDRs. And then we did end up with a lot of big houses, and I don't think people really understood what the impacts of that were going in, but we did understand the impact of developing 50 cabins in the back house.
Right.
We did understand that, and that we protected.
Yeah. Can I just get Morgan? He's online here with his hand up. Morgan?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to, I couldn't see who'd said it, but just back up the logic of having a TDR be 1,000 square feet. Because that would have been the square footage that would be built already, and that currently the program magnifies the amount of square footage in the county rather than just transferring it from one location to another. So.
And Morgan, I think you make a good point there too, correcting the ratio to be 1-to-1.
Right.
Correct. And so I think the point Barb and Randy were just making too about taking some of the lessons learned from the success of the TDR program and then using it with the overlay, which is the next thing on our chart, to really start to manage, the sending and receiving sites and really refine on the success that the program has had. So we are at 6:30. I know we kind of did our total in TDR water. If you still have a finish this discussion, so bad.
It's just something to think about for next time, that it's expensive to build, and we talked about tier 1 incentivizing them, but is there ever a possibility, like if someone were to build a 3,300 square feet house, then they get the additional square footage by then selling that as a TDR, it'd be a 1-for-1 swap, and then you kind of incentivize houses that people could actually maybe become some of the.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, but I mean, it is because. It might create a lot of technical things.
I just want to say one quick thing on TDR, for you, because I'm one of those guys that I thought 1,000 and matching up that number made more sense than escalating it. But I also, I guess, contrary to Joe, I feel like we're not encouraging the huge steps in house sizes, and we're still preserving land. So for me, that I felt like maybe that was a good compliment.
I want to just comment quickly. I'm not going to get into my other topic relative to TDRs that tracks a little bit with what Blake said. I'll save that for another discussion, maybe next time when we get into TDRs. But I wanted to just sort of, my idea was for 500 square foot TDR. And part of what I don't like about 1,000, when I read this, or the idea of 2,500, but you can sell them in 500 square foot increments. They're talking here about historic, we're gonna create fractional TDRs. It's gonna be so freaking complicated. We just make TDRs 500 square feet, then to address your issue. So if I've got a TDR that I own now, I basically have 5 TDRs. It's just a numbers game, right? And so, yeah, we said 1 TDR and 3 TDRs, depending on different zone. Well, so maybe it turns out that the TDR for 500 square feet, it would be 2 and 5 or whatever. It's a numbers game. But to me, 500 square feet, it came back to one of the things that Commissioner Childs said before we ever got together, the joint P&Z, VOCC meeting. And he said, one of the things that he didn't like about the 2,500 square feet is that it incentivized to build bigger houses. Because somebody might really only want to do a master bedroom expansion, 1,000 square feet. Bedroom expansion. But they had to buy 2,500 square feet. And so, buying 2,500 square feet, and I've got that actual FAR, I'm gonna build it. Because to me, at 500 square feet, and it took me a while to kind of get here, it simplifies the whole thing. There's no fractional TDRs, you don't have 2,500 and sell off pieces, just keeping track of them, all the math, everything, I think, just becomes simpler. And that's just a numbers game, I said. I mean, so it takes 3 TDRs instead of 1.5 at 1,000 plus 500, or whatever. So that was my thinking in coming up with 500 square feet of TDRs that really just simplify it and give somebody greater goals. And then I'll save this other idea that I've got for TDRs, but I'll just throw out the concept that the title is called, it's creating resident TDR. It's a whole new classification in TDR, and it's going to incentivize residents to restrict their houses and make them small.
Thank you for letting me.
Yes, yeah. Every single place. Thanks everyone online. Have a good one.